Hi guys, Ryu here with part 3 tutorial for Blender, Boxcutter Mastery. Part 1 we covered basic operations. Part 2 was about custom cutters. This part is all about cutters and what we can do with them. So I'm currently in Boxcutter mode, so LW. I have a basic shape here, just a cube. And if I perform a cut and left click, I'm gonna apply the cut. Right click is gonna cancel it. Now, but what can I do with this cutter in this state? Well, in the bottom here you can see the menu that shows you what can you do with the cutter. I can press B for bevel, and at the bottom left of my screen you can see if I move my wheel of my mouse, I scroll it, I can add or subtract segments of the bevel, right? Now if I move this bevel, my mouse, if I move it to the left and collapse it and move it back, I'm gonna have a chamfer. If I move it back again, I'm gonna have a bevel. And that's a chamfer. And back and forth, right? So if you press Q, you're gonna go into quad bevel mode. Q again to get out of it. If you press E, you're gonna extrude the bottom. E again, you're gonna extrude the top. If you press S, you're gonna scale it. And you can scale on Z, X, or Y. You can rotate it on Z, X, or Y. Okay? You can press G to move it. And if you press Z again, X or Y, you'll move on respective axes. If you press Z twice, you can move it on any axis except for Z, so X and Y. Now, what else can we do with a cutter like this? You can press Tab to go into sort of pause mode, okay? And you can see these dots, and these dots represent actions that you can perform. So again, E for extrusion. This one is for scaling, right? And this one is for a bevel. So you can perform these actions in that manner. Another thing that you can do is press T to introduce solidification, and solidification is going to work with slash like this. So it will introduce a sort of like a inner part that's going to be slashed out with inset. And by the way, you can adjust or stop the solidification by pressing T. So if I press T, I'm gonna stop that. If I press T again, I'm going to start solidifying. And X to go back to my original cutter. T to remove the solidification. Right. Now let's apply this cutter. Now you can see that my cutter stayed and didn't disappear. Now why is that? Because I have here enabled a function called show shape. If I have this function enabled, whenever I perform a cut, the previous cut disappears, but the new one stays. Now why would I want that? Well, you can access the cutter by clicking on it, right? And let's resize it on y-axis. So let's say that I want to bevel this, and I want to bevel it not vertically, but horizontally. So what I mean is I do not want to bevel it on these edges, which is the standard beveling direction of the cutter, but I want to bevel it in here. So I would need to do it by using this cutter, right? I can, for example, introduce loop cuts to this cutter. So let's remove this bevel for a sec and introduce loop cuts, right? And now if I'm gonna apply these cutters by Smart Apply in Hardops, which will collapse all the modifiers. So in other words, it will apply all the cutters to my mesh, right? You can see that these loops in my cutter were applied to the mesh. So I could control either mesh geometry or add another, let's say, loop cuts in a place where it would be rather difficult to do that because it's not a quad, right? It's an n-gon. So if I try to add loop cuts in here, it wouldn't work. So you could do it this way, and then I can, manipulate with this mesh, right? all those operations going to work with any cutter. So if I have a circle and press B, I can bevel it, I can rotate it, right? I can stop the beveling and, you know, use rotation on x-axis, on y-axis. I can move it and I can resize it. Another cool thing that you can do with the cutter is to control the depth of the cut. So if you go to options and, well, let's go first without options. Let's say that I want to cut to this depth, okay? But I want every single cut that I perform be at the same depth. So instead of eyeballing this, okay, what you can do is go to the shape function and change the value for the laser cut to, let's say, 0.2. Now if I select this cube and draw a shape and click to perform a laser cut, remember from the previous parts, the laser cut used to go through the entire mesh, but that was because the depth was set to 0. So if I revert it back to 0, it's gonna go through the entire depth of the mesh. However, if I'm gonna switch it back to 0.2 or whatever you want, every time you perform a laser cut, okay, it doesn't matter from which direction, it's gonna be the same depth. Furthermore, let's say you create a circle cut, okay, like this. No. But you want not just the depth to be the same, but also the size of the circle. So without necessity of copying this circle, you can actually simply repeat the same cut by holding Control. So if I hold Control and double click on the mesh, I'll be able to repeat the same cut anywhere I want, or any mesh I want, I mean any object. Okay, that's extremely powerful. What else can you do with cutters? Well, you can array them. So let's say I want to array this on the y-axis. I'm going to perform a cut and press V. It goes to x-axis. If I press Y, it's going to switch to y-axis. Scroll my wheel and I can adjust my array. Again, you can move this, resize this, right? Or rotate it. So you can perform all the same functions that you can do with a single cutter. But there is more. Let's create a circle somewhere more or less in the middle and press V twice. Now I have a circular array. But you can see it's not in the middle, so that's a bit of a problem. So how do we solve this? Well, you could go to this option in here, which is a snap grid. And if you turn those two options on, you're gonna have the snap and grid at the same time. So if you click on an object and press Control, you can see that now we have a dot in the middle of the mesh, and depending on the mesh, you can see different alignment. And if I click on this cylinder and click on press Control, I can draw from the very middle of this mesh, and then if I press V twice, right, I'm gonna have a perfect circular array for my cutters in a dead center of this geometry. Okay? But wait, there is more. First of all, my blender crashed. Surprise. Anyway, so another thing I want to show you is the size of the grid. So if I'm going to turn the grid on, you can see the grid is quite large, right? So if I wanted a bit more control, I can always resize here to, let's say, 0.1. Then my grid is much smaller. So this will allow me to draw more precise shapes if I so desire. Also, this is fantastic for drawing engons, because now I can actually draw engons along the grid to create some sort of, for example, sci-fi paneling effect that actually is aligned to, let's say, some object that I have on the scene, right? The grid will not work in view mode. So how to go around this problem when you want to create a cut from the orthographic perspective view? So let me show you what I mean. So I'm in object mode at the moment, right? So I'm performing cuts. So I'm pressing Control and I'm performing a cut using the grid now. But if I go to orthographic mode, I'm still in object mode. The grid does work, which is fantastic, and I think it's a new feature of recent Boxcutter, because it wasn't a feature before. It was really impossible to draw a grid like that, but now we can do this, which is fantastic. So, you know, if I go to view mode, if I press Control, nothing happens because the grid does not work in this mode. It only works in object mode. Now going back to arrays for a second, check this out. So let's say I have a shape like this in here, and well, let's maybe draw something like this and extrude it, okay? So let's say I had a, you know, a circular array here. So let's press V twice to get the array. But I changed my mind, you know. Let's say I wanted to have this array not on this wall but on the other wall. How can I swap it without actually redrawing the array? Well, press R, click on X, which will flip the array on X-axis. Holding Control is going to snap it, right? So you see I'm rotating it in increments, right? Then press G, okay? And since this is rotated, okay, we need to go on Y-axis, right? And then press Extrude, and you're good to go. So you can rotate literally any type of cutters. That goes also for custom cutters, right? Another thing that you can do, and actually you need to switch it in options, because by default these things are not turned on. So here you have a right mouse button to cancel N-gun, and what it does is that if you have this disabled, okay, and you draw an N-gun, right, and you want to cancel it, right mouse clicking is gonna cancel one face or edge at the time. If you want to have a click cancel, which is something I like, with one mouse button click, right mouse button click, you can cancel the whole N-gun. By the way, backspace will act exactly like right mouse click did before, so you can go here and, you know, start drawing again if you make a mistake. Then another option that I think should be enabled is those two: preserve alt and alt center, and also scroll adjust circle. Well, without scroll adjust circle, you will not be able to adjust the amount of segments in the circle, which I think is quite powerful and useful. So if you enable this, now if I scroll, you can see on the bottom left, similar place to where the bevel was here, I can adjust my segments of the circle. So that's an important function to have on. Now alt center, this is a function I use but very rarely, but occasionally it's quite useful. Now remember when we were drawing the circle and pressing V twice for the array, right? Well, you can do the same thing with boxes, okay? Now the problem with this is that if you click on array with boxes, you see that they're sort of misaligned, which could create an interesting pattern on its own. However, if you wanted to have it properly aligned, during the draw, if you hold Alt, it's gonna draw from the middle, and then if you keep holding Alt all the time, and while holding Alt and having the left mouse button depressed, double press V, now you can see that the array is going from the center of that cut. So that's quite powerful, right? And of course you can do the same thing with this array that you can do with another array. I mean with any other array. So let's go here and then rotate, and again rotate it on X, and then move it on Y up and extrude it. So you see you can do it with any array. Well, that's about it for the part 3, guys. In next part I'm gonna be talking about more features, something like for example line box, or here about active only, and other functions in this menu that might be worth mentioning. Hope you enjoyed the vid. Take it easy, and I talk to you in the next one.